"Sir, you need to step back from the children." Marcus Williams froze mid-push on his daughter's swing, his hand still gripping the metal chain. Two patrol officers stood at the edge of his manicured lawn, their hands resting casually near their belts. Behind them, Patricia Hartwell clutched a manila folder against her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line of satisfaction. "I'm sorry, what?" Marcus's voice carried the controlled tone he'd perfected in courtrooms, but his heart hammered against his ribs. His 7-year-old daughter Zoe twisted in the swing to stare at the officers, while 4-year-old Caleb abandoned his sandbox and ran to hide behind his father's legs. "We received a complaint about noise violations and unauthorized recreational activities," the lead officer said, consulting his notepad. "Ma'am here says you're operating some kind of unlicensed daycare." Patricia stepped forward, her designer heels clicking against the concrete. "Officer Martinez, as I explained, this is a residential neighborhood with strict covenants. The constant screaming and running around is disturbing the peace. And look at that sandbox, it's practically a construction site." Marcus glanced at the modest wooden sandbox he'd built last weekend, then at the swing set that came with the house when they'd bought it 6 months ago. "These are my children. Playing in our yard, your children." Patricia's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. "Officer, I've never seen this man before today. Are you certain these children belong to him?" The second officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, do you have identification and documentation showing your relationship to these kids?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. In 20 years of practicing law, he'd seen this exact scenario play out countless times in depositions and witness statements. He'd just never imagined he'd be living it. "I need to see ID to verify you live here," Officer Martinez continued, his tone growing more official, "and will need to confirm the children's safety." "Their safety." Marcus's composure cracked. "From what?" "From playing on swings I bought them." Zoe slipped off the swing and pressed against his side. "Daddy, why is that lady mad at us?" Patricia's eyes glittered. "I think we all know why I had to call for help." Marcus felt the familiar burn of recognition, the same look he'd seen in countless depositions, the same tone he'd heard in settlement conferences. But this time, it wasn't directed at his clients. This time, it was his daughter asking why someone hated them for existing in their own space. He reached for his wallet, his movements deliberate and visible. "My name is Marcus Williams. I live at 1247 Oakmont Drive. I am the father of these children." As he handed over his driver's license, Patricia stepped closer to read over the officer's shoulder. Her face went from smug satisfaction to confusion to something that looked almost like panic. "Williams," she whispered. "Marcus Williams." The officer looked up from the license. "Everything checks out, ma'am." "Mr. Williams, I apologize for the confusion." But Patricia was staring at Marcus with growing horror. "You're not. You can't be the Marcus Williams, the lawyer." Marcus smiled for the first time since the officers arrived. "Actually, Ms. Hartwell, I am in. I think we need to have a conversation about HOA discrimination policies." The color drained from Patricia's face as she realized she'd just called the police on one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the state, while he was playing with his children in his own yard. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by printed emails, HOA correspondence, and a legal pad covered in notes. His wife Sarah paced behind his desk, her nursing scrubs still wrinkled from her 12-hour shift at the hospital. "Show me the timeline again," she said, rubbing her temples. But Marcus pulled up the spreadsheet he'd been building. "First complaint came 2 weeks after we moved in. Excessive noise from unsupervised children. Then the trash can placement violation, apparently ours, was 6 inches too far from the curb. Then the lawn maintenance citation for non-conforming vegetation. Our grass looks identical to everyone else's, that's the point." Marcus highlighted another row. "Parking violation for the moving truck being in the driveway too long. Architectural violation for hanging Christmas lights without pre-approval even though half the neighborhood had 'em up. And now this." Sarah stopped pacing. "How many complaints total?" 14. In 6 months, Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I pulled the HOA records yesterday. The Johnsons lived here for 8 years before us. Total complaints filed against them, 3. The Millers next door, 1 complaint in 5 years, because they're white." "Because they're white?" Marcus tapped his pen against the desk. "I've been researching Patricia Hartwell. She's been HOA president for 3 years. Want to guess how many black families lived in Oakmont Estates when she took over? More than 1, for families. All mysteriously moved out within her first year. Each one faced an average of 12 HOA violations before they sold." Marcus pulled up another document. "Look at this. The Washingtons got cited for their garden being inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. They had roses. Sarah, red roses. Sarah sank into the chair across from his desk. So what do we do? Move like the others did? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the family photo on his desk, him and Sarah at their law school graduation. Young and optimistic, believing the system could be changed from within. Do you remember what you said when we decided to buy this house? Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion, that our kids deserved to grow up somewhere they'd never have to question whether they belonged. Patricia Hartwell doesn't get to take that away from them. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing. She picked the wrong family to intimidate, and she definitely picked the wrong lawyer. What are you doing? What I do best. Building a case. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. Discrimination, harassment, violation of fair housing laws. I'm going to document every single complaint, cross-reference them with demographic data, and establish a pattern of racial targeting. His phone buzzed with a text from his law partner, David Chen. Saw the police report. You okay? Marcus quickly replied, fine, but I think we just found our next pro bono case. David's response came immediately. Against your own HOA. This should be interesting. Marcus smiled grimly. Interesting was one word for it. But as he looked out his office window at Zoe and Caleb playing in their yard, in their neighborhood, where they had every right to exist, he knew it was also necessary. Patricia Hartwell had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed that because Marcus was black, he must be powerless. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. State your name for the record. Patricia Ann Hartwell. She sat rigidly in the conference room chair, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Across the polished table, Marcus adjusted his reading glasses and opened the first file folder. Ms. Hartwell, how long have you served as president of the Oakmont Estates Homeowners Association? 3 years. Her voice was clipped, professional, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for her water glass. And in those 3 years, how many violation notices has the HOA issued? Her attorney, James Morisana, Marcus, had opposed in court twice before leaned forward. Objection. Relevance. Marcus didn't look up from his notes. We're establishing a pattern of selective enforcement. Ms. Hartwell, I don't have exact numbers. Marcus slid a document across the table. I do. 430 violation notices. Would that sound accurate? Patricia glanced at the paper, her face flushing. If you say so. Of those 437 notices, how many were issued to the 4 black families who lived in Oakmont Estates during your tenure? Morrison's hand shot up. Objection. This is a fishing expedition. It's a direct question about documented HOA actions. Marcus kept his tone level. Ms. Hartwell, I don't know. 63. Marcus pulled out another document. 63 violations issued to 4 families over 3 years. That's nearly 14% of all violations. Despite those families representing less than 3% of the neighborhood's population. Patricia's jaw tightened. We enforce the rules equally for everyone. Marcus opened a thick folder. Let's talk about noise complaints. You personally filed 14 noise complaints against my family in 6 months. Can you describe the nature of these disturbances? Children screaming, running around unsupervised, general disruption, children playing. Marcus's voice cut through her words. In their own yard, during daylight hours, is that correct? They were being loud. Marcus pulled out his phone and set it on the table. I have video footage from my security cameras. Would you like to see the excessive noise that prompted your complaint? Morrison reached for the phone, but Marcus had already pressed play. The sound of children laughing and calling to each other filled the conference room. Normal, happy sounds of kids at play. That's the disturbance you reported to police. Patricia's face had gone pale. It was ... They were being disruptive. Ms. Hartwell, do you have children? That's not relevant. I think it is. Do you have children? Morrison started to object, but Patricia cut him off. No, I don't. Marcus nodded slowly. Have you ever filed a noise complaint against the Johnson families? Children, they lived directly across from you for 8 years. That's different. Different how they were. Their children were well behaved. Marcus pulled up another video on his phone, this one from a neighbor's social media post from 2 years ago. The Johnson children were running through sprinklers, shrieking with laughter, while adults watched from lawn chairs with drinks in their hands. This level of noise was acceptable. Patricia stared at the phone screen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Ms. Hartwell, let me ask you directly. Did you call the police on my family because we're black? Morrison slammed his hand on the table. Don't answer that. But Patricia was already speaking, her voice rising with each word. This has nothing to do with race. This is about property values and maintaining standards in people who don't understand how things work in a community like ours. People like us, people who don't belong. She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she realized what she'd said. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. People who don't belong. In a house we purchase legally, in a neighborhood where we pay HOA fees and property taxes, where our children play in our own yard. The room was dead silent except for the soft whir of the court reporter's machine. Closed his folder and stood up. I think we have what we need. As he walked toward the door, Patricia's voice followed him, shrill and desperate. You can't do this. You can't destroy everything we've built here. Marcus paused, his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of every case he'd ever won, every client he'd ever defended. Ms. Hartwell, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just making sure my children can play in their yard without someone calling the police on them for existing while black. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Patricia Hartwell to face the wreckage of her own words. Detective Lisa Ramirez sat across from Marcus in the downtown police station. A thick file spread between them. She'd volunteered to investigate the pattern of calls from Oakmont Estates after the incident report crossed her desk, partly because she specialized in civil rights cases, and partly because she lived 3 neighborhoods over and knew exactly what Marcus was dealing with. I pulled every call from Oakmont Estates over the past 3 years, she said, sliding a stack of reports across the table. Want to guess what I found? Marcus scanned the first few pages, his expression growing grimmer with each report. Disproportionate targeting. That's putting it mildly. Ramirez pointed to a highlighted section. The Washingtons called in for suspicious activity because Mr. Washington was working in his garden at 7 a.m. before leaving for his job at the hospital. The Hendersons got reported for loud music during their daughter's birthday party at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. And get this, the Clarks were reported for possible drug activity because they had several cars in their driveway during a family barbecue. Jesus, it gets worse. I cross-referenced the complainants. Ramirez opened another file. 93% of the calls about black families came from the same 5 people. Patricia Hartwell tops the list. Marcus rubbed his temples. What about response times? Officer behavior. That's where it gets interesting. Ramirez pulled out a different report. Average response time for calls in Oakmont Estates, 8 minutes. Average response time for calls about black families for minutes. And look at this. She showed him another document. 3 of the responding officers requested backup for suspicious person calls that turned out to be homeowners in their own yards, including the call about me, including yours. Officer Martinez told me off the record that Patricia Hartwell specifically said she was concerned for the children's safety and mentioned you were acting aggressively. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. I was pushing my daughter on a swing. No, I watched the body cam footage. Ramirez leaned forward. Marcus, I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen patterns like this before, but never this blatant. Patricia Hartwell has been running a systematic harassment campaign, and she's been using my police department to do it. So what happens now? Now, we build a federal case. Ramirez stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. Civil rights violations, conspiracy, abuse of process. The FBI takes this stuff seriously, especially when it involves using police resources for racial harassment. Marcus felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same feeling he got when a case shifted in his favor. What do you need from me? Everything. Every complaint, every interaction, every piece of documentation. But Marcus, double quotes. Ramirez turned back to face him. Are you sure you want to do this? Fighting your own neighborhood association. It's going to get ugly. Marcus thought about Zoe, asking why the lady was mad at them. About Caleb hiding behind his legs when the officers approached. About all the families who'd been driven out before him. Detective, I've spent my entire career fighting systemic racism in courtrooms and boardrooms. I'm not about to let it win in my own backyard. Ramirez smiled. Good, because I already called the FBI field office. Agent Sarah Kim wants to meet with you tomorrow. As Marcus left the police station, his phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Hartwell. We need to talk. This has gone too far. He deleted the message without responding. Patricia was right about one thing: it had gone too far. But she'd made the mistake of thinking that meant he would back down. She was about to learn that. Marcus Williams didn't back down from bullies. He sued them. The Oakmont Estates Community Center had never been so packed. Every folding chair was occupied, with more residents standing along the walls. Marcus sat in the front row with Sarah, acutely aware of the whispers and stares directed their way. Patricia Hartwell stood at the podium, her face flushed and defiant. This emergency meeting has been called to address recent disruptions to our community harmony, Patricia began, her voice carrying across the room. As your HOA president, I want to assure everyone that we will not be intimidated by outside agitators or frivolous lawsuits designed to shake down our association. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but Sarah's hand found his and squeezed tight. Williams family, Patricia's voice dripped with disdain, has chosen to make this neighborhood a battleground rather than following the same rules that apply to everyone else. They've brought lawyers, police investigations, and media attention to a simple matter of community standards. An older man in the third row stood up. What exactly did they do wrong, Patricia? Jim, please sit down. This isn't no. I want to know. Jim Morrison, no relation to Patricia's lawyer, just an unfortunate coincidence, remained standing. I've lived here 12 years. I've seen the Williams kids playing in their yard. They seem like nice children. It's not about nice, Patricia snapped. It's about following rules. A woman near the back called out, "What rules? My kids play outside too." Patricia's composure was cracking. That's different. Your children respect community standards. Marcus finally stood up, his tall frame commanding attention. I'd like to address the community, if I may. You don't have speaking privileges at this meeting, Patricia said quickly. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner in good standing has the right to speak at community meetings. Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, and my family is current on all dues and assessments. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia looked toward the board members for support, but found only uncomfortable silence. Fine. 2 minutes. Marcus walked to the front of the room, his presence filling the space. My name is Marcus Williams. My wife Sarah and I moved here 6 months ago with our 2 children because we wanted them to grow up in a safe, welcoming community. He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the crowd. Instead, we've been harassed, intimidated, and ultimately had the police called on us because our children were playing in our own yard. Best not. Patricia started to interrupt, but several people shushed her. Ms. Hartwell has filed 14 complaints against my family in 6 months. Marcus continued. For comparison, the previous owners of our home received 3 complaints in 8 years. The difference isn't our behavior, it's our skin color. The room erupted in voices, some supportive, others angry. Marcus waited for quiet before continuing. I'm not here to threaten anyone or shake down the association. I'm here because my 7-year-old daughter asked me why that lady hates us, and I realize that if I don't fight this pattern of discrimination, the next family will face the same harassment, and the next, until this community returns to being all white, which appears to be Ms. Hartwell's goal. A woman in the front row recognized her as the Johnsons' neighbor stood up. I've lived here 20 years, and I've never seen Patricia file complaints like this before. Not until ... She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Patricia's face was red with rage. This is exactly the kind of divisive rhetoric, Ms. Hartwell. Marcus interrupted quietly. Would you like to explain to the community why you told the police that you'd never seen me before, despite the fact that we've been neighbors for 6 months? The room went dead silent. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Would you like to explain why you suggested to Officer Martinez that the children in my yard might not be safe with me? Patricia found her voice. I was concerned. You were concerned that a black man was with 2 children and assumed the worst. Marcus's voice remained calm, but the words hit like hammer blows. Just like you assumed I was running an unlicensed daycare instead of being a father. Just like you assumed I was a threat instead of being a neighbor. The silence stretched until Jim Morrison spoke up again. Patricia, is this true? Did you really not recognize Marcus? Patricia looked around the room, seeing the skeptical faces, the dawning understanding. It was a misunderstanding. No, Marcus said firmly. It was racism, and it ends now. As he walked back to his seat, the room buzzed with conversation. Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. The damage was done. 3 board members approached Marcus before he left the building. By the end of the week, Patricia Hartwell had resigned as HOA president. But Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Federal Judge Margaret Chen looked out over her courtroom as the attorneys finished their final arguments. The case of Williams v. Oakmont Estates HOA had drawn national attention, with civil rights organizations filing amicus briefs and housing advocates watching closely for the precedent it might set. Ms. Patterson, Judge Chen addressed Patricia Hartwell's new attorney had withdrawn after the community meeting debacle. Does your client wish to make any final statement before I render my decision? Patricia stood slowly, her designer clothes replaced by a conservative gray suit. The past 6 months had aged her visibly. Your Honor, I want to apologize. To the Williams family, my actions were wrong. I let my fears about property values cloud my judgment, and I treated them unfairly. It was a carefully crafted statement, designed to minimize legal liability. But Marcus could see the real Patricia, in her eyes, still bitter, still unrepentant, just finally understanding the cost of her choices. Judge Chen nodded curtly. Mr. Williams, would you care to respond? Marcus rose, feeling the weight of every civil rights case he'd ever worked on. Your Honor, this case was never about money or revenge. It was about my children's right to play in their own yard without someone calling the police on them for existing. He turned slightly to address Patricia directly. Ms. Hartwell, I don't need your apology. I need you to understand that your actions had consequences. For families were driven from their homes because of your harassment. Children were taught that they don't belong in their own neighborhood. That damage can't be undone with an apology. Patricia's composure cracked slightly, but she remained silent. Judge Chen reviewed her notes one final time. This court finds that the defendants engaged in a pattern of discriminatory harassment based on race, in violation of the Fair Housing Act and 42 U.S.C. Section 1981. The HOA is ordered to pay damages of $150,000 to the Williams family, plus attorney's fees. Additionally, the court will appoint a monitor to oversee HOA operations for the next 3 years to ensure compliance with fair housing laws. The gavel came down with finality. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Marcus and Sarah. Mr. Williams, what message do you hope this case sends? Marcus looked at Sarah, then at Zoe and Caleb, who were playing on the courthouse steps under their grandmother's watchful eye. The message is simple. Every family deserves to feel safe and welcome in their own home. And when systems fail to protect that basic right, there are people willing to fight for it. Will you be staying in Oakmont Estates? Sarah answered this time, her voice strong and clear. It's our home, our children's home. We're not going anywhere. As they walked away from the courthouse, Zoe tugged on Marcus's hand. Daddy, can we go home and play on the swings? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. Of course, sweetheart. They're your swings, in your yard, in your neighborhood, and for the first time since they'd moved to Oakmont Estates. That felt completely true. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the same yard where this all began, watching Zoe push Caleb on the swing set. But now the yard was full of children, the new neighbors' kids, the Johnson children who'd moved back after Patricia's resignation, and several other families who'd decided to give Oakmont Estates another chance. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying a pitcher of lemonade, greeting the other parents who'd gathered for their monthly neighborhood barbecue. It had started small, just a few families wanting to build the community they'd all hoped for when they'd moved here. Now it was a tradition. Daddy, look, Zoe called out, pointing to the edge of the yard where a for sale sign had just been planted. Someone else is moving to our street. Marcus walked over to investigate, Sarah joining him. The house had been empty since Patricia moved out 6 months ago. She'd sold quickly and quietly, relocating to a gated community an hour away. Think they'll fit in? Sarah asked, but she was smiling as she said it. Marcus watched their children playing with their friends, heard the laughter and conversation filling the air, saw neighbors helping neighbors. I think they'll be fine. We've built something pretty good here. His phone buzzed with an email from his office, another family facing HOA discrimination, this time in a suburb outside Houston. They'd heard about the Oakmont Estates case and wanted his help. Another case? Sarah asked, reading over his shoulder. Marcus looked at the email, then at his children, then at the community they'd fought to be part of. Another case, but this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. The Oakmont Estates case had connected him with a network of attorneys, activists, and families who'd faced similar harassment. They'd formed a coalition, sharing resources and strategies, turning individual battles into a coordinated campaign for fair housing. As the sun set over Oakmont Estates, the yard gradually emptied as families headed home for dinner and bedtime routines. Marcus and Sarah sat on their back porch, watching Zoe and Caleb play one last game before coming inside. Any regrets? Sarah asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. The past year had been brutal, the stress of the lawsuit, the media attention, the whispered conversations that stopped when they walked by, but it had also been transformative. They'd discovered which neighbors were true allies, built real friendships, and created the inclusive community they'd always wanted. No regrets, he said finally, though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if Patricia had just let us be neighbors. Sarah laughed. She would have saved herself a lot of money and embarrassment, and missed the chance to learn something important. You think she learned anything? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about Patricia's final statement in court, the careful non-apology that revealed she still didn't truly understand what she'd done wrong. Maybe not, but everyone else did. The HOA board, the community, the families who'll move here in the future. They learned that discrimination has consequences, that some fights are worth having, that belonging isn't something you have to earn, it's something you deserve. Zoe ran up to the porch, grass stains on her knees and joy on her face. Daddy, can we have another barbecue next weekend? Tommy's family wants to come, and the new people too. Marcus scooped her up, spinning her around. As she giggled, "Of course, sweetheart. This is your neighborhood too." As they headed inside for dinner, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from a case well fought and justice well served. But more than that, he felt the simple pleasure of being home, truly home, in a place where his children could play without fear, where neighbors looked out for each other, and where the sound of children's laughter was welcome in every yard. The HOA had called the cops when he let his kids play in their yard, but in the end, all they'd accomplished was proving that some battles choose you. And when they do, you'd better be ready to fight. Marcus Williams had been ready, and he'd won more than just a lawsuit. He'd won his family's right to belong.